Welcome in everyone to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me today as we talk about the Jaguars 2023 salary cap situation and the ways that they can navigate it. So, to start off, we're using overthecap.com. For all of this, I've got 3 tabs up, and this is available to anyone, doesn't come at a cost. We have the salary cap calculator for the Jaguars. To get here, you just go to the main page, come down to view all on the salary cap, and then unfortunately you'll find the Jaguars at the bottom of this list because, well, not as much salary cap available. So you go here, they've got calculator, contracts, free agency. We'll just use calculator. And then everything we're going to talk about today is going to be based around before free agency, just retaining players that have been on the roster, who you cut, how you get under the salary cap, all that stuff. The other 2 tabs we have open. We have the draft resources. This is also from Over the Cap. This tells us for each team how much money needs to be saved in order to sign rookies. So for the Jaguars, it's $9.9 million, so we'll go with $10 million to be safe. What you have to factor in as well, the Jaguars have 9 picks in this draft. That could change. There's trades they can make. But roughly, you want to have enough money available for the picks that you have, and you should be fine. Anything trade-wise won't really impact the salary cap too much unless you're trading up into the early first round for, a top 5 pick, which just isn't going to happen this year. So, with that said, 9 players likely to be drafted. In the salary cap, you'll see, if we scroll down, it's the top 51 that count towards the salary cap. So these guys down here, which obviously Ridley will be part of the roster, they're not going to be factored in to the calculation on here. So what we have to do is we'll get this roster down to 42 players. Now, I'll just cut generally who I think wouldn't make the roster, and obviously that'll change based on what free agents are signed. If this team, has someone break out in like training camp, that's going to make the roster. I mean, for example, Tim Jones was a player, even though he didn't do a lot this last year, we didn't really expect him to be on the Jaguars until he had a really good preseason. So that's kind of how we're going to treat this. And then over here, my last tab, you can find this on here by going to contracts table. And so it just shows you each position and the highest paid players. And what we'll be focusing on is the APY, which is average per year. So this will kind of help us calculate contracts. Some of these are going to be a little different though. And there's going to be some assumption made because there's 2 ways a lot of these can go. One is that we get a team-friendly deal to keep a player, or a player wants his market value, which most likely for players who are wanting market value, it's going to be a lot harder to retain, and they might not be able to be retained. So, with all that said, one last thing we'll factor into this is the Calvin Ridley situation. So, this number here is the cap space that they have available, and because it's in red and in parentheses, that means that's how much they are over. And this is a salary cap. So, how this works is this year, and I think it was just announced yesterday for me, the salary cap is set as $224.8 million. So how this works is all of the money that you didn't spend the year before gets carried over into the next year. So assuming this is updated, which before it was $225 million, so it's only a difference of $200,000 from what they projected. Assuming that's updated, the Jaguars had about $1.98 million available from this last year. So this is the number that we are over before Calvin Ridley, which looks really bad because you don't have money. You're needing to re-sign a lot of guys, and that doesn't even factor in the 11-something million that Calvin Ridley should get. And so you'll see here, if I go to extend or renegotiate, which is what you have to do with him because he's suspended, if you reset this, it'll factor in. However, you'll see it didn't change the number. And the reason why is because he's down here off the 51 cutoff. And with the way this website's set up, I can't move him up. So what we will do is we'll take, for example, hold up one moment. Take Blake Hance. So Blake Hance is probably not going to make the roster. I mean, maybe he does, but I honestly had never heard of him before. And we'll pretend this is Calvin Ridley. So for this year, he would be getting that much for the base salary on the 5th year option. You'll see down here, no prorated bonuses, guaranteed salary, any of that. So now that we've added Blake Hance on, who is our Calvin Ridley, you see this number finally changes. Now this is the real number that the Jaguars are working with. I see it a lot on Twitter or Facebook, wherever it is, where you're either getting people saying this number or they're saying 22 million. And it's easy to miss because of the Calvin Ridley situation being pretty confusing. But now we have that factored in, and you'll see it change by about 10 million. And the reason why is because when we moved him up, that moves Garrett Prince here off the calculation. So the change in the salary cap is essentially Calvin Ridley's contract being added on minus the $750,000 cap number here. And this shows dead money, cap savings. So these guys down here, there's not really any dead money other than Nathan Rourke. So you'll see even if I cut him, it doesn't change anything. But if I'm to cut the next guy, you'll see it does, because he's part of the 51-man roster and his contract was already calculated in. So now that I've spent what feels like a few years talking about how to set this all up, we'll go ahead and start looking through the free agents that the Jaguars have. And actually before that, we'll look at the players that they could look to cut off the roster. So an obvious start to this list, as much as I like him and I thought he was going to be a really good leader in Jacksonville and a good player long term, Shaquill Griffin's not going to be back with the team. There's just no scenario where that happens unless he wants to get paid like $2 million a year. And I don't think he's going to take a 90 to 95% pay cut. That's just not realistic. Jimmy Garoppolo's pay cut was less than that, and that seemed pretty crazy, going down to $5 million this last year. So Shaquill Griffin's going to be our first cut. And so what they'll do now is it'll save us $13.1 million off the cap, and then they'll add $4 million in dead cap. And what dead cap is cap space that you cannot use on other players because that money is being paid out to players no longer on the roster. So you see some familiar old names on here. And EJ Perry, even though he's on the list down here, I believe this is because he was cut before. So there's small amounts of money that factor in for, practice squad guys who are on the team. They got to be paid something for showing up. So you'll see Chenault's on here from the trade. Jay Tufele is on here. Gregory Jr., because he went off to the practice squad. He might have been off the practice squad, actually. But I know he wasn't on the 53-man roster for a little bit. So that's where the dead cap is right now. And when we add Shaquill Griffin, this number doesn't update, but it is there. This is just showing before. You'll see that the cap space is now $19.4 million over. So now we got some other work we got to do. So it's really hard to make these decisions because we all love the players. We all want them to stay around. We hope there's a way it happens. But there's another player we're going to have to cut here that a lot of people like that's just not going to be affordable, honestly. It's not Rayshawn Jenkins, but it's Robertson-Harris. And that's probably going to open up, not probably actually, it will open up a need at defensive tackle for this team. Ideally, you want to add someone because at that point, you've really got Devon Hamilton, who is really good right now, and then you have Foyesade Oluokun. And he didn't really play a whole lot this last year. You got injury concerns with that. What you'd like to do is get an interior pass rusher, if you can. But, you got to see what kind of money you have available after. That depends on whether you re-sign all your guys. And it also, depends if you can find someone in the draft. Because the way this class is, I think you could find someone later in the draft that's really good. you got a hit on it, but it's really like 2 or 3 guys at the top who are going to be gone before our pick. And then at that point, you're just taking someone who might have a little bit of risk, or there's something in their game you don't like. So that's kind of the situation there. But this is $7.8 million that the Jaguars save, and that is a lot of money going towards this. So that is a choice they'll have to make. Now, Rayshawn Jenkins, you could look to restructure his deal. That is an option here, and we'll see if we need to. But I would not cut him, because the way you have to look at this is essentially you're not saying, okay, is he worth $10.5 million a year? Because you're already on the hook for $4 million. Nothing you do changes that. You know, unless it's just guaranteed salary and not a signing bonus, I believe. I think that's the only way. So I think, yeah, even if you trade him, yeah. So this is bonus. So you're already on the hook. Teams still cover that when players are traded. So the real question you have to ask yourself is, Rayshawn Jenkins worth $6.5 million a year? Because that's what you save. You see, when we cut him, that's how this factors. And the question is, the answer is no. I worded that wrong. The answer is that you don't cut him for $6.5 million a year. You have 2 games this last year that he won for the team. And we've already got needs we got to fill. We've got, the draft picks to maybe get it done. You don't want to add in another need to that list. And so Rayshawn Jenkins, he's going to stick around. I don't see any way the team's moving on from him unless they're in that bad of a situation and wanting to retain all these guys, and they got to pay him more than expected. Maybe that's the only way, but I wouldn't expect that. So Rayshawn Jenkins is going to stick around. Now, going through this list, we're looking for players who have big cap savings. So Rayshawn was the one, and we can't move on from him. So maybe you restructure, push cap down the road. And so essentially how that will work is you'll have money converted to signing bonus, and the player will get that up front before. And so even though the cap money from the signing bonus gets spread out over the rest of the contract, the player gets that now. So it doesn't hurt the player. It just changes when you're paying them. So we'll be doing some restructuring here soon. Now, probably the last 2 guys we'll mess with for now. There's Jamal Agnew and Chaisson. So Chaisson played better at the end of this last year, but the reality is he's not worth this cap money right now. I wouldn't keep him for that. And with his pedigree as a first rounder, you can get something out of him in a trade. And you're not looking for like a 3rd rounder or something large like that. You're just looking to get something. And if you trade him or you release him and he gets claimed by another team, I believe it's the same savings each way, but you'll see here when we set this to trade, it changes it to $2.4 million saved. And I believe if you look over here, that's because the same dead money there, that's the prorated bonus. So that's money that the team is already on the hook for. So I think you can trade him. You could find someone who would take him on. Probably the Panthers again. They seem to like all of our failed experiments for some reason. And they also like the Jets ones too, with Sam Darnold. But you do that, you save a little more money. Jamal Agnew, you're going to look to re-sign him to a longer deal. I think that's realistically what happens, because you've got, I believe, 1 more year, because if you go forward to 2024, Jamal Agnew is a free agent. So, with his numbers, if you cut him, you're saving a lot, but I don't think that's worth it. And we saw that in the playoffs where, he came pretty close after the fumble against the Chiefs to running, I think it was a punt return back for a touchdown. I think he got tripped by the last guy. He was consistently in the playoffs, setting up the team in really good field position. And we saw him multiple times set up the team for touchdowns because he put them on the opposite side of the field. You had the Lawrence coming out on the other side of the 50. And that's worth a lot. you can't undervalue that. And even though he didn't return a kick for a touchdown because the one he did was called back because of a holding call against the Titans, he's still arguably the best returner in the game. He's on that list at least. So what we'll look to do is we'll look to extend him and renegotiate this contract. So let's say 3 years we want to throw out. And you want to give him a signing bonus because you want the player to get something still this year, ideally. You don't want all that money to get pushed off. So let's just throw in $3 million to start. Some of these numbers might get changed. So you throw in $3 million. That gets spread out over these 3 years. And then you come to base salary. You'll set this to the veteran minimum, which I believe is, should be like 1080. If that's off, it is off. You know, it's going to be off by like 100 or 200,000 at most. So let's say that's what that is. So now your cap number's down a few million this year. And then you look for the next year. We need to change these because obviously he's not going to play for that. And so Jamal Agnew's deal, if we want to take a look at it. We'll go to Spot Rack for this. So he took a little under $5 million a year to come to this team. So we're probably going to match that because he's been exactly what they expected from him. And he made the Pro Bowl too. I mean, you can argue you make more money than this. So, I mean, that's fair to say. But we'll be roughly about that same amount, maybe a little under. So let's say, let's do this. Push money down the road a little more. So this overall is just under 14 million. It's going to be about 13.7 million for 3 years. So roughly the same deal, but you see the cap numbers going down this year. Not a ton, but it's going down. And if you want to go down more, you can lower this signing bonus. That's an option. But we'll go ahead and transact that. You see this changes. So now, here's where we run into the problem. Because we are still over the cap space. We need to re-sign players. And we really made about every move we would be willing to make. So what you have to do now, we might cancel one of the restructures after, but we'll go ahead and we'll restructure some of these players. So players you want to look at restructuring are guys that you want to keep around for a long time. You're confident staying here. And I think there's 3 people, actually arguably 4, heck, maybe 5 on that list. I won't throw in the 5th because Rayshawn Jenkins only has another year. So he's probably just got to be extended and completely renegotiated if they're going to work with him this offseason. But Christian Kirk is one of those guys. So you'll see when we restructure this, we'll get under the cap, but you'll see the salary cap numbers change next year. So he's at 21.5, 21.5. When we restructure, he's down to 11.7, but these shoot up a little under 6 million. So you're pushing about 11 something million down the road. Roughly about that. And you're now under the cap space. Next player I'd be willing to restructure is Foyesade Oluokun. So on his, we've got him at 19.1. So he goes down to 12.2. And all that money goes to the next year. Now, maybe you aren't comfortable restructuring him. They may look to do it in other players because you have 2 linebackers behind him. So maybe this isn't a move they make. But Oluokun was one of the best linebackers in the league. And just because you got players behind him doesn't necessarily mean that you're looking to remove that player from your roster the second you can. Especially when they're that good. So we'll still have him restructured. Next guy is Darious Williams. So he's at 12.5 million. Now when Darius came here, he signed a pretty cheap deal with the Jaguars. He took actually not the biggest deal he was offered in free agency because he wanted to play in Jacksonville. Those are the kind of guys you want around. And not only that, But when Williams was finally put outside this year, he played like one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. And right now, I think you can confidently say, if you're the Jaguars, your starters on the outside are among the best in the NFL. I mean, you surely feel that way about Tyson Campbell, and Williams showed you that as a lockdown corner late in the year. So would I want to keep him? Absolutely. You see that number that popped up over here, $5.2 million. That's what we saved from the cap. So this is where we sit. Now, one trade I've mentioned on our website before, and who knows if it happens, probably won't, because I think the Jaguars want to keep the guys they've had around, and I think there's still intention there to keep this guy around. But Cam Robinson could be traded. That is possible. And I do believe that there would be a market for him, especially when you look at teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, or even the Chicago Bears, who they need help for Justin Fields. Problem is, the player you're losing. But at the same time, your best combination of players on the offensive line was arguably Walker Little on the left and Jawaan Taylor on the right. There's a big question on whether this team can maintain all of these players. So, we don't know. It's going to be hard to do. We're just speculating here, seeing roughly what the numbers could be, but there's a lot of work in it. But if you look to trade Cam Robinson, you're probably getting a day 2 pick, which the Jaguars have been really wildly successful with the last few years. I do think that Chad Muma and Luke Fortner will join that resume. I believe that. I think even now, both of them were good picks at that time. But you look at the year before. Tyson Campbell, top of the second round, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. Walker Little could be your left tackle of the future. Maybe he's the right tackle next year. Depends on what you do. After that, Andre Cisco, one of the favorite players on the team. Huge difference maker, makes big plays, doesn't give up the big ones either. I mean, when did we see the Jaguars give up like a 70-yard pass other than the fluke Deshaun Jackson catch in the Ravens game? I mean, I don't even know how that happened, honestly, but that's probably the only time. So, I mean, you're really comfortable with him as well. And so those are your 5 guys you've drafted on day 2. You're comfortable with that. So you are getting something back from Cam Robinson. Now, you paid him $7 million this last year. That's what the contract was. And you've pushed money down the road already. And originally, when you signed him to the franchise tag, it was about $16.7 million to retain him. So here's where kind of the brilliance comes in on the way they did the Robinson deal. They needed to push cap down the road to make room, because they wanted to bring in more players, make room for the draft class, all that. If he is traded, say it's before June 1st, and this, basically the difference between these is a lot of the time the post June 1st just splits your dead cap over the next 2 years instead of this next year. If you trade him before June 1st, you have $10 million in dead cap, but you're saving 12. So you factor it like this. You paid Cam Robinson to play here for 1 year if you trade him, and you're paying him $17 million spread over 2 years. That's roughly the same number that they got him for on the franchise tag, which they, obviously replaced with a new deal. So it's a brilliant move at the time, because you could still trade him. You could still get something out of him. The only way this doesn't work is if Cam Robinson did not play good. And he played fine. He wasn't as great as you wanted, but he was still a good left tackle. And those are valuable in this league. So there is the option for that. And if they want to not push the cap to its absolute limit, they could look to trade Cam Robinson off of this deal and use that money to get Jawaan Taylor back. So if you do, go up to 28.7. Now let's look at Jawaan Taylor's contract. So I think the number I've seen is around 14 million, and everyone's going to be all over the place with these numbers. They'll be different, and we just won't know until they're signed. But if we go to right tackles, highest paid are these. Oh, we got tight ends in here. There we go. So you have 6 guys being paid above 14 million. And Jawaan Taylor, he really had the one good year this last season. And he still had games where he was completely off. But you're paying him about what he's worth, quite frankly. And so I think you could probably get him around 14 million. Now, how I would structure that, you probably look for about 12 million in signing bonus. And the reason why is because he'll get all that money up front. You set his base salary to the minimum. He's getting 13 million in his pocket the first year. So he's still getting paid fine. But your cap number is a lot lower. So let's get this contract, let's say 42 million over 3 years. So you got 12 million here, 13 million. So you're going to put that amount each year. So this overall is 42 million, roughly. And so now you bring Jawaan Taylor back, you've got him on 5 million this next year. It's not a whole lot. Not a huge cap hit. It's a huge cap hit just down the road is where the difference is made. And an important thing to factor in as well, look at the free agents this next year. You have probably 4 guys you're really adamant on re-signing, assuming they don't fall off a cliff. Josh Allen, Calvin Ridley, Devon Hamilton, and Ben Barch. And that assumes Ben Barch played like he did the first 5 weeks of this last year, because he was pretty good. And maybe you get a left guard that's pretty affordable and does well for you. So you don't have a ton of guys like you do this year. And the reason why is not good, but it works out. Because the reason for it is the 2020 draft class sucked. You had CJ Henderson traded. Not good. Caleb Chaisson. In this scenario, he's traded. He's your last guy left. And he has not been anywhere close to what you wanted. And then your third pick in that draft was in the second round, Laviska Shenault. He's traded. He's not here anymore. He wasn't what you expected. So because of that, when you have bad draft classes, you don't got to worry about re-signing players. And so really the 2 guys you re-signed from that draft class are probably Devon Hamilton and Ben Barch. And I don't think either of them are going to be super expensive. Plus you're backloading all your contracts still. And then you get Calvin Ridley and Josh Allen. They will be more expensive, but your cap hit that year is not going to be huge. It's going to be on 2025, where you got a big number here. So that's our deal for Jawaan Taylor, and we'll see what we can keep at the end of the day. I like Marvin Jones a lot. I wish he would come back, and I think it's possible he comes back. But the best thing for him to do, unless at this point he just wants to win a Super Bowl and is willing to take a really small salary to do that, he needs to go to a team like the Bears, or I don't want to say the Texans, but just someone who's rebuilding that doesn't have a good receiver core, and he'll have a starting role there. And he's a really good veteran to do it. He's been in that situation. He's thrived in that situation. He had 800-something yards the year before last. He's a good player. And I think that's the best thing for his career. And with the Jaguars having 3 other starters at receiver, it makes sense. Unless he wants to be a role guy. So I would leave him. Now, Evan Engram. He signed a 1-year, $9 million deal. So with Engram, he will probably be taking a team-friendly deal, realistically. We don't know that for sure. And I think he's worth more than $9 million a year. But the truth is, this is where he's going to play good. And the Jaguars hold the cards in that way. Because if he goes to, say, the Seahawks, just a random team. Nothing against the Seahawks at all, because they actually were good this last year. He's probably not going to do the same thing in Seattle. It's because he's playing with Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, that his career is going the way it is now. So, if I'm him, I'm staying here. And you could probably get him for about $9 million a year. You look at other tight ends, there's guys who are generally considered about as good, although I think Engram is a lot better, that make a little more. But quite frankly, I think you take a team-friendly deal. So if we do that, let's put in $9 million for the signing bonus. And we're ignoring guaranteed salary in this video. That would be a factor in this, but that stuff I don't know as much about, and that factors in more down the road if you're looking to cut one of these players. So you've got $9 million in your base minimum, $10 million. Let's get them to say $28 million. So these are your cap numbers. And those are the biggest ones you've got, re-signing guys. So now, Tre Herndon, you're going to bring him back. Not necessarily as a starter, unless they can't get a nickel corner, which would be a travesty. They're still going to get him back, and it's probably going to be base salary, like it's been. And don't get it wrong, Tre Herndon is a really good guy to have on your roster for the base salary. I mean, once he played in the slot for a while, he was playing solid. I mean, you didn't love everything. He's not one of the best slot starters in the NFL. He's not even probably average. But for $1 million as a veteran, yeah, you're keeping him. Absolutely. Corey Peters, he's going to retire. That's what it all sounds like. And even if you keep him, it's veteran minimum. It's not going to impact the salary situation. Now, Dawuane Smoot and Arden Key. I think those are two of the guys you have left to re-sign. The rest of this list, Andrew Wingard, you have to bring back for what he is as the leader and the whole it was always the Jags thing this year. I mean, I just can't see them getting rid of him. And they sure as heck don't talk like it's going to happen. Maybe CJ Beathard. You could also draft a guy to develop or just get an undrafted guy. JaMycal Hasty you probably want back, and Riley Patterson. So, Dawuane Smoot, problem for Smoot is that he got injured late this year with an Achilles tear. And so that's going to hurt him a little bit. He was earning about $5 million a year. If we look at his stats, even without a few games, you see he's on track for what he's done before. The last few years, it's 5 to 6 sacks. And he might have had more. We just don't know what would have happened. But after these 2 years, he got $10 million over 2 years. So with the injury being factored in, he's probably going to get a little less because it's a risk. And so say we sign him to a 2-year deal, team may elect to do one, say $2 million in signing bonus. Your base cap, and I'd probably throw $5 million. And of course, you'd have guaranteed salary in here to protect the player a little bit the next year. But this is probably your cap hit. And for Arden Key, you're probably looking at about the same number. Because even though Arden Key was big on pressures, his production in sacks did go down a bit. So you have some leverage there. And I think these players are arguably worth more. But reality is, you got to get under the salary cap. You got to do something. So we'll do that for Smoot. Now Arden Key, probably going to be a 2-year deal as well. Actually, he's probably going to get a little more. So let's say that's the number. It's about the same deal. $500 more in the bonus. Now we've got Wingard, Hasty, and Patterson. Hasty, you signed him for veteran minimum. You can probably retain him for that. If you don't, no harm, no foul. You're going to probably draft a running back if you can already. And then Riley Patterson, probably the minimum. Now, Andrew Wingard is the last guy we really got to worry about on here. So with Wingard, I believe he signed, we'll look at his contract. I believe it was 3.5 over 2 years. Let's see what his deal was in 2022. So, excuse me for a moment. Okay, so here we go. 2.4 million was the salary this year. And the reason why he's got 3 years on the rookie deal, I believe, is because he was undrafted. It works a little differently. That's why, like, James Robinson is technically going to be a free agent this offseason after 3 years because he was undrafted. So I'm probably giving Wingard $5 million over 2 years because that's about where he lands. He's not a starter, but he's valuable to the team. He's a good leader. Throw in $2 million for bonus. Actually, let's do this a little different. So you've got 1.5, 2.5. Throw in our 2.5, you're at about 5 million. So you see all these cap numbers, they're pretty low. The only one that isn't is Calvin Ridley. And technically, if you really want to bring everyone back and you even want to keep Cam Robinson in this scenario, you could look to sign a long-term deal with Calvin Ridley. If it was Blake Hance on here. You could do it. Now, I won't, because you need to make sure he's the same player he was. But it's an option. It is on the table, and they could do it. So, now that we look at this, we've got back all the really important free agents. Now, we need to make sure, if we've got 9 picks, let's cut to where we've got 42 players on this roster. Because the 51 count, 51 minus 9, 42. So you have 9 guys you re-signed on here. Let's say for a moment we don't want to trade Cam. You want him back, right? So let's remove that. Salary cap situation, you're still under. That's good. So you got your 9 guys re-signed. We'll just count through here. It's 13, skip Griffin, 14, 15, 18, 21. Cisco's the 30th. And everyone under Monteric Brown, just say we cut them all. And we'll just recount this, make sure this is fine. Yeah. So it's 42. So you are 200,000 away from what you need available, because remember, rookie pool for the Jaguars is 9.9 million. You've restructured 3 players to get here. So at this point, just look through here. Just gotta save 200,000. It's really not a huge deal. I mean, you could even look to do something with Tyler Shatley. I think you want to keep him around for sure, but just sign him to another year. He's a guy you're probably gonna want to keep. So let's just do that. Let's get ourselves in a good situation here. Finish this off to where we got enough money. So offer him. So you want to give him that first of all. Actually, let's do $1 million. Reason why, his base salary is going to get taken down almost $1 million. If you give him the signing bonus, he gets roughly the same number. You're moving cap down the road. So Tyler Shatley. Let's look at what his contract was before. I believe 2 years, 4.8 million. You've got the big part of that in this next year. You see, they pushed it down the road. So you got to factor that in, because you can't give him an average of 2.4 million over these years, because he got paid like $1 million something before. So this contract probably needs to be worth like $6.5 million, something around there. Oh, hold up. So roughly that number for your base. So this is about $3.5 million without this number. So we'll throw in $3 million. And that gets you right there. You're not saving a ton. It's just a small deal. You can really mess with any of these, in all honesty. But you re-sign a player like that, you extend him. I think that's fine. You know, I believe he is Walter Payton Man of the Year. He's a really good backup you want to keep around. You pay him $3 million. Not a huge deal. So, looking at this situation now, you've got enough money for your rookies. You do not have money to spend in free agency. Now, if you want to spend money in free agency, you don't re-sign one of these guys. And you could look to do that. People I think that's possible for, probably Jawaan Taylor at the top of that list. Just because Taylor can be replaced by Little. And I think even bringing him back, you need to have Walker Little starting somewhere on the line. Even if he's a guard. He's proven he's a starter, and you gotta get your best 5 out there. I think even if they have all 3 of them back, talking about the big tackles we've had play, I think they're all going to start. You're just going to put one of them at guard, and it's probably going to be Walker Little. Evan Engram, you're keeping him. I can't see any way this team cannot work something out. I cannot see Engram deciding to walk away from this team or declining a deal. And the Jaguars are going to offer him something. So, outside of that, Dawuane Smoot or Arden Key. That's the only other player that really makes sense not to bring back. And even if you do that, you factor these numbers together for the 3, that's $9.5 million you're saving. So, it's a bit, and that's enough to sign a really good player in free agency because you can backload. But you gotta keep in mind your future salary cap. So you see here, this number has gone down a lot. Reason why is because we push money down the road. So now you look at guys like Kirk, Oluokun, and Williams. I mean, honestly, Williams' contract here, that's not far off what he's been worth for the team. You know, especially late in the year. Christian Kirk, that's near like top number 1 receiver money. It's a lot, but you're pushing it down the road. That's the reason why that number's there. Foyesade Oluokun, you know, he's earning a ton for a linebacker, but once again, you're pushing money down the road. You know, and he's still getting per year, on average, what he's worth. So now, this next year, you've got 4 guys that you probably look at re-signing out of this whole roster. You got to factor in, you're going to have your draft class from this year counting. So you're probably going to be over the cap again if you're keeping everyone. So it's $9.9 million this year. It'll go up a little bit in the future, so let's say it's $11 million. Or say 11.5. You're negative $3 million before re-signing these guys. Now, you could fix that really quick. Because you've got Fatukasi, for example. Didn't do a ton this year. That's $8 million you save. That's something. Brandon Scherf, he could have played better. And he's going to be 33 this year. So, that's a ton of money. That's more than Shaquill Griffin saves. And it's the same for Cam Robinson. And they could look to restructure these guys. And at this point, you know, you're getting down the road. You're going to have your draft classes coming up to be re-signed in the future. You know, you see that here. Lawrence, for example, he'll be on a 5th-year deal. But Tyson Campbell, Andre Cisco, Travis Etienne. We're getting far down the road. But that's where you're going to be. At that point, things are changing. You're going to be getting rid of some of your older players. And you're going to be working with the talent you've brought in through the draft, which is how every team hopes they set it up. So, this is a way the Jaguars could deal with it. Now, I'd be all for it. As long as you've got Walker Little starting still when you're keeping Taylor, I think it's fine. I think this is a way you can go. And ultimately, what are your losses? You're losing Shaquill Griffin, who is not really a loss because we played without him most of the season, and he was a liability on the field. I think you can make a really strong argument. There are 2 games this team lost because of Shaquill Griffin. You look at the Washington game and the Indy game in Week 6. Those are huge, flagrant examples of it. Him just getting burned by receivers. So is this a loss? Unfortunately, no. It's really not. And then Robertson-Harris, he's gotten sacks on the interior. He is going to be a loss. Him, along with Marvin Jones, would be your biggest losses. Chaisson, I'm not really going to throw on here. And all these guys, we're just removing players who really don't have a big role. Non-discriminatory either. Just bottom of the list, you're gone. But, yeah, you've got defensive line on the interior, and you've already replaced Marvin Jones because you have Calvin Ridley. So, how's the team changing? More experience. And they're a year under Doug Peterson. You have an entire draft class coming in, and the only thing you got to replace to get where you were before is Robertson-Harris. You've got 9 picks in the draft. There's a lot they can do. Who knows what direction they go. I know I'm prone to change how I feel towards it, what I think they should do. And I know right now I lean towards pass rusher because the elite teams have good pass rushers. And, maybe Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker break out. But is it going to hurt to add a third guy? I don't think it would. So, I think that'll wrap this up. This is kind of where the Jaguars sit. If you want to mess with this yourself, it's overthecap.com. Just main thing you got to remember, Calvin Ridley is not factored into the number right off the bat. So on here, Blake Hance, that's our Calvin Ridley, theoretically on here. So yeah, that's all I've got for this. I appreciate y'all watching. If you have any questions about this or any thoughts, feel free to leave them. We all are probably going to feel a little differently on how we'd want the Jaguars to approach things. That's part of being a fan. But hopefully this gives you an idea of where the Jaguars are, and that, even if the numbers look scary, there's ways to negotiate it. Like Balky said, cash is more important than cap. And they got the cash to sign these bonuses and spread this out. And ultimately, I think we're going to have a better Jaguars team in the future. So, thanks for joining me. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.